Меня зовут Matthias Schwartz, я организатор конференции Миф о Сталинградской битве с немецко-российской сравнительной перспективы. Конференц организированы вместе с Claudem Haasом, оба статутники научного центра литературоведения и культурологии в Берлине. И я литературовед и славист, и в основном занимаюсь в последние годы современной литературой, и как там показана Вторая мировая война. И что меня интересует, это как раз как сегодня образ войны и того периода меняется в новых условиях. Мы живем уже как бы после войны, после как бы холодной войны, и с другой стороны все участники и свидетели войны, они уже умерли. Другой главный момент, конечно, что в немецкой, особенно в западно-немецкой культуре, эта битва была очень мифологизированный образ чистой, честной немецкой армии, и этот миф разрушился только как бы в конце 80-х годах и в начале 90-х годах, и с тех пор Сталинград не играет такую роль, и мы хотели как бы с дистанции смотреть, как литературоведы и культурологи сравнительной перспективе как бы на российскую сторону и на германскую сторону, как сегодня как бы оценивать как бы этот топос войны и топос битвы Сталинграда, и как это меняется как бы в течение времени от как бы послевоенных годов до настоящего времени. И это была идея конференции, и мы очень довольны, что мы как бы пригласили очень разные ученые, как бы с разных как бы профессий и с совершенно разными как бы темами. И партнер нашей конференции это русско-немецкий музей в Karlshorste. И это очень историческое место, потому что здесь немецкая армия подписала полную капитуляцию вечером 8 до 9 мая 1945 года.
Меня зовут Franziska Thun-Hohenstein. Я научный сотрудник Leibniz-центра по истории литературы или изучению литературы и культуры в Берлине. Тема моего доклада была «Лейтенантская перспектива. Заметки в окопах Сталинграда Виктора Некрасова». 30 лет спустя, приблизительно 30 лет спустя после моего первого прочтения некрасовского текста, я его перечитала и поделилась своими соображениями, некоторыми вопросами. Мне было очень интересно перечитать, потому что я стала обращать внимание на некоторые детали, которые при первом чтении, видимо, улизнули тогда, так сказать, от меня. Это, во-первых, я представила короткую историю создания и публикацию, критику. И, во-вторых, мне стало очень интересно, перечитывая, обратить внимание на то, что Некрасов сознательно, написав повесть, роман с первого лица в настоящем времени, передавая свой личный опыт, который был еще очень свеж, Керженцеву, главному герою, в самом тексте опирается исключительно на Толстого в некоторых местах, как своеобразную литературную модель описания войны. В своих воспоминаниях он сам вспомнил Ремарка, которого он читал в 30-е годы. Второй момент, который для меня был в этом смысле очень важен, это своеобразная реакция Сергея Эйзенштейна в конце 1946 года, в своей последней лекции перед студентами, которые должны были написать режиссерский вариант сценария на основе некрасовского текста «Сталинград» или «В окопах Сталинграда».
Меня зовут Иван Kurilla, я профессор Европейского университета в Санкт-Петербурге, и мой доклад будет посвящен тому, как Сталинградская битва, Сталинград сегодня используется в политическом, общественном дискурсе России. Дело в том, что в последние 20 или 30 лет Сталинградская битва постепенно становился все более важной такой референтной точкой для всех политиков, которые в России обсуждают современность. История Сталинградской битвы все больше и больше становилась элементом политической борьбы, и в связи с этим возникли несколько сюжетов, постоянно обсуждающихся российскими общественными деятелями, политиками. Это тема переименования города Волгограда в город Сталинград, это тема Сталинграда как символа победы или символа страданий, это тема, связанная с Сталинградской битвой как событием международной истории или как событием национальной, прежде всего важной для национальной гордости. Вот об этом и о том, как менялись представления, каким образом развивалось в последние десятилетия использование Сталинградской битвы в российском обществе, российской политике, я и выступаю здесь.
Меня зовут Роберт Чандлер. Я работаю переводчиком, главным образом русской литературы. Мои любимые писатели, кроме Пушкина, это Андрей Платонов, Василий Гроссман и Тэфи. «Жизнь и судьбу» я перевел очень давно. Я только, наверное, 6 лет тому назад в первый раз прочитал «За правое дело» Гроссмана. Раньше я не обратил внимания на него, как очень многие литературоведы. Я принял общее мнение, что это просто обычный соцреализм, может быть, немножко лучше, чем другие романы этого времени. Но все считали, что раз это было в первый раз издано в 50-х годах, особенно интересного это не могло бы быть. Это глубоко ошибочное мнение. Американско-немецкий историк Йохан Хелбек меня убедил в том, что надо перевести этот роман. Главная разница между двумя романами «За правое дело» – это о теме памяти. Уже в июне 1945 году Гроссман в интервью сказал, что мы, писатели, должны бороться против сил забвения, что мы должны все помнить. И это очень... он помнит все. «Жизнь и судьба», которая была написана 10 лет, 15 лет попозже, это более о моральных и политических вопросах. Это в несколько степени это работа философии. «За правое дело» — это роман. Главное, что мы сделали в нашем переводе, это мы открыли один итальянский ученый мне давно послал сканированный машинопись, раннюю машинопись этого романа. И там очень много интересного, очень много комического, иронического, странного, которое не вошло в изданные версии романа. И мы включили в нашем переводе, наверное, 300 отрывков этой ранней машинописи. Советские литературные власти, они настаивали, чтобы все связанное с Сталинградом было на высоком, на грандиозном уровне. Так что мест, например, для насекомых не было. Так что в машинописи есть очень много про вши, про блохи, про все. Почти все эти насекомые исчезли с изданных версий. И много подобного. Наверное, в самом начале это случайность играла важную роль. У нас в школе был чудесный старый эмигрант, который преподавал русский язык, и я сразу полюбил язык и культуру из-за этого. А перевод, это труднее сказать, но я могу сказать, что во время года, который я провел в Воронеже в 1973-1974 годах, я в первый раз там читал кое-что Платонова, и это на меня сделало впечатление. И после возвращения в Англию я с восторгом читал Чевенгур и Котлован, хотелось их перевести. Но я тоже я достал сборник его версий русских народных сказок. После войны он издал маленький сборник, там 7 русских народных сказок в его переработке. Чудесно сделаны, с юмором, с прекрасной стилью. И их я перевел. Это был мой первый изданный перевод. И это началось просто от того, что особенно сказка «Безручка» меня особенно тронула. И я просто хотел показать эту сказку англоязычным друзьям. И для этого пришлось перевести его.
Меня зовут Нина Тумаркин. Я профессор истории и заведующий кафедрой исследования русской культуры в колледже, который называется Wellesley College в Массачусетсе, около Бостона. И я тоже научный сотрудник в Davis Center, это Центр исследования России и Восточной Европы и Евразии при Гарвардском университете, и это там, в Гарвардском университете, который я получила мой докторат там. Ну, я профессор сейчас. Да, опять хотят. В 90-е годы, конечно, все, интерес как-то уменьшился. А вообще Владимир Владимирович Путин как-то нам помог, потому что есть намного больше интерес. Но у нас был такое, конечно, у нас было нападение 11 сентября 2001 года, World Trade Center, да? Так вдруг большой интерес в Средней Азии, арабский язык, а потом, конечно, китайский язык. Так я думаю, что есть небольшой интерес к русскому языке, а к истории еще да, истории, политики, и литературе. Как мы говорим, самое главное вообще, что студенты их интересует, это, как мы называем, как сказать, толстоевский. Да, у меня есть куча студентов сейчас, я преподаю историю Советского Союза, а также большой интерес в средневековой истории России. Так и есть, да. Это невозможно. Это невозможно. Это невозможно в России. Вообще, я думаю, что даже у нас в России даже больше нету культа войны, это просто культ победы, даже без войны. Кто помнит, что война была трагедия? Но, может быть, после 75-летия будет еще 25 лет до 100-летия. Кто знает, Бог знает, что там будет, но теперь все больше и больше будет фокус, можно так сказать по-русски, фокус на людей, которые, конечно, на погибших солдатов, потому что ветеранов уже нет, не будут. Так, если будут больше и больше просто ритуалы, какие-то памяти и скорби, и посещения на кладбище, военных кладбищ и прочее, тогда, может быть, будет ощущение, что хорошо, можно сказать, что они все были герои, они все победили, но все-таки это были молодые люди, которые скончались в такую страшную войну. Так может быть. Ну, вообще, такой тон в России сейчас, что на 9 мая это просто триумфальное. Я не знаю, если что-то может измениться на 9 мая. Может быть, 22 июня, да. Мой доклад на этой конференции вообще по теме исторической памяти о войне в России. Как это было при Советском Союзе и как это изменилось при Путине. И особенно эти несколько лет после 70-летия эти лет вообще есть некоторые изменения, как исправляется День Победы, к пониманию об исторической памяти. И туда я как-то всунула Сталинград тоже. И какая роль играет Сталинград, если кое-что менялось. Если, я могу вам быстро сказать, что если есть 20 миллионов героев, которые ходят по улицам на фотографии в бессмертном полку, тогда кто будет вспоминать о Сталинграде? Потому что люди думают о своих. I'm really honored to be here, and many thanks to Matthias Schwartz for having invited me, and particularly to be in this absolutely stupendous and meaningful venue. I have a personal connection with this city. It's only my second time visiting Berlin, but I have a family connection. After the 1917 revolution, my father, Paul Tumarkin, and his family left Petrograd and then their dacha on the western shores of Lake Ladoga for Paris. And then in 1922, they emigrated to Berlin and stayed in Berlin until just before the war in an elegant apartment on Heilbronner Straße. I have a wonderful family album of photographs of the apartment, and particularly treasure a photograph of my grandfather's, if you can believe this for a Jew, a 1940 dinner in Berlin with a visiting Soviet theater troupe, because it was during, of course, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and they're all there in the dining room. So, yes, the title is What Has Happened to Russian War Memory and the Myth of Iconic Stalingrad. The memorialization of Stalingrad is inextricably intertwined with the beginning of the Soviet cult of the Great Patriotic War. Indeed, with the transfer of the USSR's great legitimizing myth from the cult of Lenin and the revolution of 1917 to the organized venerational worship of the idealized Great Patriotic War. The first instance of the transfer sprang from the 25th anniversary commemoration of the USSR's first iconic victory in the Great Patriotic War, the Battle of Moscow, in December of 1941. And in December of 1966, then, 25 years later, the remains of an unknown soldier from a mass grave at the site 41 kilometers from Moscow was buried at the Alexander Garden near the Kremlin Wall. And the tomb of the unknown soldier was unveiled on May 8th, the eve of Victory Day, 1967. A torch with a flame that had been lit at Leningrad's Marsovo Polya, the field of Mars where lie the remains of the martyrs and heroes of the Bolshevik Revolution, was transported by armored vehicle to the Alexander Garden, and the flame was used to light the new eternal flame at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The first main speaker was the secretary of the Moscow Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and he said as follows, and I quote, "It is as if the soldiers of the revolution and the soldiers of the Great Patriotic War have closed ranks into one immortal rank." The second instance of this transfer was celebrated only a few months later, and that was of the second and most important iconic Great Patriotic War victory, besides Berlin, of course, and that of Stalingrad, in the opening of the Volgograd Memorial on Mamayev Kurgan. On October 15th, 1967, Leonid Brezhnev presided at the opening of the Grand Volgograd Memorial Complex and simultaneously marked the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the October Revolution, and brought again the two great myths of the October Revolution and the Great Patriotic War into the Soviet mnemonic landscape. Of course, the signal monument, Rodina Mать Zовёт, which is, I think, as far as I know, still the world's tallest statue of a woman, from the tip of her toe to the tip of her sword, was the work of the same sculptor, Yevgeny Vuchetich, who had designed the Soviet soldier right here in Treptower Park in Berlin in 1949. So Brezhnev's speech at the opening of Mamayev Kurgan really set some very important parameters for the cult of the Great Patriotic War, which was really just beginning. It was only in 1965, just 2 years earlier, that Victory Day was made a holiday, a non-working day. So Brezhnev, in a rather long speech, said that the victorious Stalingrad battle was not simply a victory, but исторический подвиг, a historical great exploit. Interesting, he managed to leave Stalin out of it completely, and he talked about the victory by the Soviet people under the relationship of the Leninist Communist Party. Of course, it wasn't the Leninists at the time. And he said, had there not been those sacrifices, there would have been no Pobeda, that a bright, wonderful, victory, that a bright, wonderful city has arisen where there were only ruins. And then he said, the monuments in general are not just those of marble. The best monument or pamятник is to achieve our cause for which they gave their lives, moving forward to communism. And so the rest of his speech kind of mushed together celebration of the battle, celebration of the victory, celebration of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and celebration of communism. He pointed out the USA continues its criminal aggression against Vietnam, and the CPSU is against all such adventurism. Communism will triumph. For the first time, he gets applause. Years and decades will go by. Children and grandchildren of the Stalingrad heroes will come here. Actually, this was true. They do, don't they? Here we think of the past, hope for the future. Eternal glory to the heroes of the Stalingrad battle, applause. Glory to the heroes of labor, applause. Long live the unconquerable banner of October, бурные аплодисменты. And long live world peace, бурные аплодисменты. So it really was together. It was the war, and it was the 50th anniversary of the revolution. True, of course, 1967 was a kind of pinnacle moment for the Soviet Union, a moment for celebration. The USSR was in a very strong position. Its main rivals were largely incapacitated. The United States was mired in Vietnam. China was in the throes of the Cultural Revolution, while the Soviet Union's global reach was widening, and the past victory of Stalingrad and the war was aligned with the future victory of communism. The speech by Brezhnev set the tone and message of the full-blown cult of the Great Patriotic War. Its salvational grand narrative of the Red Army's liberation of a world enslaved by Nazism was celebrated in monuments, publications, works of literature and art, and civic rights throughout the USSR, as well as in the communist satellites, and particularly beginning in 1975, the war cult also played an ever-increasing role in the militarization of Soviet youth. That cult, which peaked with the 40th anniversary in 1985, combined, of course, orchestrated official elements with grassroots components, only to be expected in a land in which hardly a family had been untouched by the war. It's important to note that along with the self-congratulatory triumphalism also came an emphasis on the 20 million war dead. This was a figure that Khrushchev had come up with, the 20 million war dead. The main slogan of that war cult was, "No one is forgotten, nothing is forgotten." Of course, this was a huge lie. There was so much that was intentionally forgotten, intentionally left out. The unpreparedness for the war, the Katyn massacre, the Strafbataillone, the punishment battalions, etc. There was also a component that the USSR was a kind of guardian of peace, that never again should there be a war. Very, very similar, by the way, to Japan, particularly in Hiroshima, the guardian of peace. We have suffered more than anyone we know. In post-Soviet Russia of the 1990s, the war cult eroded rapidly. The eternal flames of tens of thousands of war memorials were left to flicker out, and many veterans became reluctant to display their wartime medals in public for fear of being made the targets of insults about their long-standing privileges, heroic posturing, according to some, and having fought in a war to save a system that finally ended up destroying itself and ruining the lives of millions. Predictably, the 50th anniversary of the victory in 1995 was marked with some real fanfare, including a parade showing off military hardware on Poklonnaya Hill, Poklonnaya Gora, the site of the newly opened, just opened Museum of the Great Patriotic War. From my understanding, the reason that the military parade was not in Red Square was that Bill Clinton, who was going to be coming, said that he would not witness a military parade. So the military parade was moved to Poklonnaya Hill. And yes, actually he did, in theory, read my book in preparation for that trip, and he wrote to the director of the United States Information Agency who had sent it to him. It's sort of mixed. It's a great book, he underlined that, but then he wrote, "I'm working my way through it." An extensive cult of the Great Patriotic War was revived only after Vladimir Putin assumed the presidency. Lev Gudkov, who heads the Levada Center, Russia's preeminent and really only reliable polling agency, set the beginning of the regenerated cult of the Great Patriotic War at 2004 or maybe 2003. In addition to the upcoming 60th anniversary of the victory in 2005, there were heated memory wars at the time with the Baltic states in the aftermath of their relationship to NATO, their relationship to the European Union, in the aftermath of the 2004 Orange Revolution in Ukraine. All of this intensified the Russian leap into war-driven memory campaigns. Tied to the assertion that the USSR had a unique salvational role in defeating fascism was also the assertion that the victory had been a moral victory, which gave and continues to give Russia the right to dictate policy to others. Very important part of it. The 2008 Russia-Georgia War, the 2013-14 uprisings in Kiev, the annexation of Crimea and the subsequent and ongoing conflict in the Donbass solidified this militaristic turn, which was in special evidence in 2015, the year of the 70th anniversary of the victory on May 9th, which, as you might remember, was boycotted by all major Western leaders except the president of Serbia. Although Angela Merkel did come to Moscow and laid a wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldier the following day. The atmosphere of, or the sort of tone of Putin's speech was very defiant, glory to Russia. There was no mention of never again. There was no mention of guardian of peace. There was a kind of feeling that the real slogan of the 70th anniversary victory celebration, and I was there in Moscow, was Krym nash, you know, the Crimea is ours. Very, very defiant. And in the place of any motto like never again, I saw bumper stickers that said 1941 to 1945, можно повторить. We can do it again. And even some of them showing a burning White House, I mean, in White House in Washington, or Capitol building in Washington. And so you have an extreme militaristic attitude, a glorification of Russia, and also what had disappeared was the notion, this already happened I think by the 60th anniversary, that anybody except ethnic Russians had fought in the war. The holiday became very Russified. Russia's intensified militarism coincided, and this is an important point, with, I would say, a diminution of the cult of the Great Patriotic War and its eclipse by a cult of the victory, pure and simple, with the war playing less and less of a role. I remember going to 4 different exhibits at that time in May. They were all called Победа, and there was hardly anything about the war. I mean, it was really mostly medals and Победа and Berlin. And surely the Immortal Regiment, which expanded with rapid, indeed explosive intensity after its inception in Tomsk in 2012, for those of you who don't know about it, I think most of you do know about it, those processions in which millions of people hold aloft photographs of their relatives who had contributed to the war effort. Surely that had played a role as well. So here's a photograph of the Immortal Regiment, the Besmertny Polk in Volgograd. You can see these people with all of those portraits. And in fact, Volgograd was one of the first cities after 2012 to have have their own Бессмертный полк procession. That was in 2013. Moscow's first one was in 2015, and by that time it was already very much began to be dominated by the Kremlin, with President Putin marching, of course, in the front row. So all of this has been instrumental in the institutionalization of the cult of the victory. The very intelligent and articulate director of this museum mentioned yesterday that Moscow's Museum of the Great Patriotic War is now called the Victory Museum. And that's really telling. That was on June 22nd, 2017. The museum was renamed the Victory Museum. So I'd like to now move, after this historical background, to something more of the current situation and what I see as both a simplification and a complication of the war myth. In recent years, and particularly since that simultaneously sort of orgiastic and defensive 70th anniversary of the victory commemoration in 2015 in a country stung by the post-Crimea sanctions, the war-driven mnemonic construct has incorporated some striking new elements. Most evident, in addition to this victory cult, has been the heroization of everyone who had fought in the war. Now, whatever happened to the idea that soldiers were thrown into battle because they had been forced to, or had chosen to fight, and that a few standouts had accomplished genuine podvigi, heroic acts, and had been indeed genuine heroes. Beginning with utterances by Vladimir Putin and rapidly moving into the realm of commonly accepted truths is the assurance that all the millions of fighters whose portraits are borne aloft in the Immortal Regiment marches were heroes. And the same contention holds now for the MIAs, those missing in action, or пропавшие без вести, unearthed by Russian searchers who now, or поисковики, they're called поисковики, they now number around 50,000 people of various ages, and when they unearth these remains, they refer to them as heroes. These MIAs who, it was just mentioned by Mr. Chandler that for decades they had been in disgrace. They were considered, they might have surrendered, they might have deserted, they might have been defeatists. By those who are searching for them, they are referred to as geroi. This kind of mass heroization is comfortably embedded in the cult of the victory, with the idea that replaced the Great Patriotic War cult, that every dead officer and soldier was a hero because everyone had contributed to the victory. Also because, and I was just arguing about with a Russian when I was with some of these poiskoviki just last July, he said each one was a hero because they knew that they were likely to die and they went anyway. So here's an example from, now going back to the Immortal Regiment, from the Volgograd 2015 website about the upcoming 70th anniversary victory, inviting people, a commemoration, inviting people to join the Immortal Regiment. And it said, организаторы приглашают всех, кому дорога память о родственниках победителях, сформировать бессмертный полк. Для этого нужно взять фото героя и прийти 9 мая на построение. So the organizers are inviting all those to whom the memory of their relatives who were victorious relatives to come to the Immortal Regiment, and they should bring a photo of their hero and come to the lineup on May 9th. A second major and recent change to the war cult, in addition to its, well, the third, I suppose, into its partial eclipse or total eclipse by the cult of the victory and the mass heroization of its soldiery, is the recent explosion of myriad micro-narratives attached to the thousands of found missing MIAs, people missing in action, by the many search groups, and the millions of frontline soldiers represented in the photo portraits carried in the Immortal Regiment processions on Victory Day. The Immortal Regiment marches populates the mnemonic or memory landscape with new stories, or at least with photo-captioned portraits, each of which represents an individual story to add to a broken up, kaleidoscopic aggregate of piecemeal narratives, those of the fighters depicted in the images held aloft by the marching throngs. The searchers also try to piece together and bring to light the real history of the soldiers they take so much trouble to unearth, seeing where they had fought, and in many instances, most instances, figuring out very obviously how they had died, also adds thousands of new stories to the mix. It's true that with these poiskeviki, only about 5% of the instances they are able to identify the remains. But they feel that they know something about each bayets, each fighter that they bring up. So all of this vastly complicates and enriches the current Russian war and victory narrative and engages millions of people in the national celebration, commemoration, and ritualization of war-driven memorial practices. For decades, the cult of the Great Patriotic War had included both popular elements and control from above, with decided emphasis on the latter, on the control from above. In recent years, the Kremlin has invested much in an attempt to produce a Soviet-style domination over historical narratives, especially of USSR history. But efforts to enforce the introduction of a single history textbook proved singularly unsuccessful, and I believe my colleague Ivan Kurilla has written about that somewhere. Besides, the traditional war chronicle depicted, for example, in Moscow's Victory Museum emphasizes not totally, but a great deal what I call the Big Five. The Big Five Victories: Moscow, Stalingrad, Kursk, the lifting of the Leningrad siege, and Berlin. And to many people, that's very tiresome. It's tired, it's old, it's uninspiring. Besides, those commemorations lacked individual people. I was listening to a wonderful, very evocative 1965 song by Vladimir Vysotsky called, the wildly popular Russian bard, called Bratskие могилы, Fraternal Graves. And it resonates with grief at the observation that, quote, "Here there is not a single personal fate. All fates are merged into one." This erasure of the individual in the interest of the collective, in death as in life, was one of the several negative features of the Soviet-era war cult, and indeed of the revived iteration in much of the Putin era as well. But what better idea than to retain those familiar iconic victories as a kind of structural framework while infusing vast new energies into popular patriotic pride by these additional elements and countless new personal connections in both the narrative and political ritual. The searchers and the immortal regiment participants have now found ways precisely to vastly expand and energize Russian war memory with an untold number of, quote, the personal fates that Vysotsky was longing for, that make it far more relatable to many, many more people. And how does Stalingrad fit into this new configuration of the kind of kaleidoscopic war memory? First of all, I would say that iconic Stalingrad continues as a lodestar in the constellation of war memory. It is still the battle of battles and is referred to as such. For example, this past July, I spent 6 days in the area of Kaluga with a large contingent of search groups digging for the remains of пропавшие без вести, the MIAs, from a supremely bloody battle of 1942 for Vysota 269.8, a hill near a village called Fomina, the focal point of a struggle over Warszawskое шоссе. A recent book, fairly recent, published in 2014, about the battle, includes a poem about Fomina, about the battle, written by a veteran who had taken part in the battle. And he measures the brutal challenge against Stalingrad, which is a kind of gold standard. So he writes, «У кого Stalingrad? У кого Sevastopol? У нас Fomina». Right, so, you know, sort of some have their Stalingrad, some have Sevastopol. We have Fomina. Really, over something like 100,000 people died in this battle. And later in the book, there's a reference to это израненная Фоминская земля, где осколков может быть не меньше, чем на Мамаев кургане. So, you know, this wounded Fomina land where there may be no fewer bomb fragments than were on Mamayev Kurgan. So it's Stalingrad then is the measure of all battles. But Stalingrad has definitely been crowded out by this myriad narratives like Fomina and micro-narratives like those embedded in the millions of portraits held aloft every year in the immortal regiment marches. In Volgograd, of course, the February 2nd anniversary of the battle's end, one of the 6 days a year in which the city's name reverts to Stalingrad, is commemorated in grand style, with President Putin present at the 70th anniversary in 2013 and the 75th last year. Interestingly, Putin's 2018 Stalingrad speech resembled that of Leonid Brezhnev in 1967 in the sense that Brezhnev said, the best memorial is to achieve our cause for which they gave our lives, moving forward to communism. And Putin said, the defenders of Stalingrad, the entire generation of the victors, did not only demonstrate heroism at war, they passed on to us a great legacy of love for our motherland, readiness to protect, and so on. We must look to our fathers and grandfathers' feats, and just like them, be steady in our purpose and strive beyond what we have already achieved. He didn't say on to communism, but strive beyond. And we can compare to this poignantly the wonderful speech of your own Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who was then foreign minister in Volgograd 2 days before the 75th anniversary of the victory in 2015. He was in Volgograd on May 7th, and I'll just read a few excerpts from this speech. This site was a place of war. Now it is a place of reconciliation. Russians and Germans will shortly meet here on this stage and play music together. Volgograd is the city of heroes. Who were those heroes? They were people who experienced unspeakable suffering. Here in Stalingrad, these people began Europe's liberation from Nazi dictatorship. In doing so, they made immeasurable sacrifices. As a German, I bow before these victims in sorrow. I ask for forgiveness for the infinite suffering that Germans inflicted on others in the name of Germany. Germans and Russians can and should commemorate together, and the ground we stand rises the warning that the Russians aren't warning anymore. Never again should people inflict such inhuman suffering on others. And it's an opportunity for all of us, Germans, Russians, and all the peoples to say together, never again. Let us work for a world of peace. Very much better speech than what Putin 2 days later proffered at the military parade in Moscow. Going back a few years to a visit to Volgograd that I paid in 2012, a few months in advance of the 70th anniversary of the battle, I met with a certain, as they say, Neki Sergei Fadzeev, who was part of the group charged with planning the big event, which was to include a self-congratulatory so-called March of Victors. I made, if you can believe it, a valiant, almost impassioned effort to help shape that event, the 70th anniversary commemoration, by urging him to scuttle that plan, recommending that he decouple Stalingrad from the 1945 victory. Because the 1945 victory is tainted by the post-war occupation and Sovietization of Eastern Europe. To represent that battle, great and terrible, merely as the pathway to victory would undermine its purity. That was my idea, that there is something pure about the Stalingrad battle, because the Red Army battled the enemy on Soviet soil and did not at the same time engage in actions against enemy civilians or non-enemy nations. I meant, of course, but did not say outright, that in Stalingrad, the Red Army did not rape women by the hundreds of thousands, as in Germany in 1945, or help to install puppet regimes in foreign countries. I told Fadzeev that he would have a unique opportunity to construct a commemoration that was not triumphalist or shamelessly self-congratulatory. I lost. He wasn't convinced at all. In recent and current Russian war memorialization, there's an additional striking change, is a recent and steady increase in public rituals of mourning the war dead. On January 27, 2009, on the 65th anniversary of the lifting of the Leningrad blockade, a new civic aktia, or memorial action, was introduced into Russian memory practice. Svechia pamяти, or candle of memory, perhaps inspired by the candle of memory monument to the Holodomor that was opened in Kiev the year before, in 2008. And here you see at Poklonnaya Gora, people holding candles. Here also in Moscow, people holding candles in front of the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. Then this occurs on 22 June, День памяти и скорби, the day of remembrance and sorrow, of course the date of the German invasion. At 4 a.m. On 22 June, people in cities and towns in various parts of Russia and some of the former Soviet republics now engage in this Svechia pamяти practice. It's been going on now for 10 years, lighting these little votive candles in glasses as part of officially or non-officially organized groups. Or they're encouraged to place lighted candles in their apartment windows and then photograph those lighted candles in their windows and post them online with a particular hashtag to popularize and publicize the ritual. On June 22nd of this year, a line of 1,418 candles, one for each day of the year, was ranged along Moscow's Crimean embankment. School children are prepared for the Candle of Memory event in the Uroki Mужества, or lessons in courage, that form part of their obligatory patriotic education curriculum. And the action's organizers claim that the Candle of Memory is a ritual of solidarity comparable to the wearing of the orange and black striped Georgian ribbon and marching in the Immortal Regiment. As these things do tend to happen, the idea originally came from below, but was eventually transmogrified into a more organized and official practice involving many thousands of people in Russia and abroad. And here's a photograph of police in Volgograd lined up with their candles on the early morning of 22 June, and ordinary people in Volgograd doing the same thing. In addition to these rituals of mourning, I see a new attention to the civilian victims of the war, as evidenced in a new project. The project has been spearheaded by the umbrella organization for searchers called Поисковое движение России, Search Movement of Russia. It's called Без срока давности, which means no statute of limitations. And its stated mission is to disseminate historical information about crimes of the Nazis and their collaborators in occupied territory. I'm expecting that Ukrainian collaborators and Baltic collaborators will probably figure prominently here. The film and television projects are already in the works, as well as plans to engage in search activities where civilians were improperly buried in mass graves and need to be reburied. And Елена Moiseyevna Tsunaeva, who heads the Поисковое движение России, also is co-chair of the Бессмертный полк Москвы, also is on the organizing committee for the 75th anniversary of the victory for next year, so sort of really big in patriotic education. She said at the launching of this project, or she wrote, during the war years, more than 16 million USSR civilians were murdered, tortured, burned, and killed by bombs. And now they kind of plan to overrun the memory landscape with 16 million additional tragic victims. So the previously so-called unknown pages of the war keep multiplying exponentially. Indication that the 75th anniversary of the victory in 2020 will be marked with enormous jubilation and orgiastic fanfare, comparable perhaps only to the 1986 350th anniversary of Harvard University, which I witnessed myself. It was really something. Already in July of this year, Vladimir Putin announced that 2020 will be known as, quote, the year of remembrance and glory. This actually was the idea of this same Yelena Moiseyevna Tsunaeva, who sent the idea off to the Kremlin in the fall, or last summer already, and so it was taken. So it's going to be something huge. But what will happen in the following years is not clear. 75 is a momentous anniversary number, and a much more momentous anniversary number than 80 will be. And the 2045 centennial is a long way off. And it may be that the victory cult will not be able to be sustained for an indefinite period of time. However, the dead are here to stay, and the Kremlin has moved into action on this front. Very recently, on July 23, 2019, the Kremlin issued an ukaz concerning, quote, the perpetuation of the memory of defenders of the fatherland for 2019 to 2024. Signed by Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, the decree highlighted the significance of World War II, or Great Patriotic War military cemeteries and burial grounds, and allotted 3.9 billion rubles to restoring such sites that are in need of repair or reconstruction. And and to adding the individual names of dead fighters wherever possible throughout the Russian Federation. The thrust of the decree, which covers the final 5 years of Vladimir Putin's fourth presidential term, is meant to leave a legacy far into the future. Live veterans of the Great Patriotic War are on the verge of extinction. Now that they are gone, they represent a sacralized generation that the state cannot maintain as though they were somehow still with us, as Lenin's embalmers had been able to do with the author of Bolshevism in 1924. Only occasionally, poiskeviki and immortal regiment celebrants can flicker them to life at hallowed moments. So the war dead, as dead, will have to serve the state and the people as the occupants of grave sites and military cemeteries through which their aggregate heroism can continue to be tapped by the Kremlin through time as an effective source of patriotic pride and inspiration. In this space, it is right to move on to the question of reconciliation of Russia with Germany. In 2015, Mr. Steinmeier said that we should commemorate together, and here in Volgograd, we're exactly the right place for joint remembrance, he said. Do Russians and Germans commemorate together? And the answer, of course, is yes and no. This museum itself is a sign of a certain kind of commemoration and collaboration. Volgograd has its famous German cemetery that I visited, and its Russian cemetery, which is much more modest, actually, than the German one. And then there are also many groups and individuals who are involved in various projects of reconciliation. My favorite is, and you're seeing the way this man is dressed correctly. This is Отец Vyacheslav Kharinov. He's a St. Petersburg priest who is also the head of a motorcycle gang, or a motorcycle club called Ost. It's called Ost, and it's dedicated to paying respects to the war dead. So here you see him in his priestly garb and his motorcycle jacket. He has I should have had a photograph of that. He has a motorcycle, a red motorcycle named Ruby Tuesday. Right, and on it, on the back, it says Ha and Ve, like Christos Voskres, right? Christ has arisen. But it's really also for Kharinov, Vyacheslav. So it's, he's really a very unusual priest. And he organizes. They go to Germany to pay respects to the German and the Soviet war dead. And he himself constructed this modest German war dead cemetery outside of Petersburg that he took me to. He was lecturing here. There was a group of Germans visiting. On the other side, last year's poiskeviki that I was with, who were really ultra-patriotic types, didn't even want to mention the word Germany, and they mentioned the word fascist only when they wanted to describe a Ukrainian. When I asked if they really think that they're finding only Soviet soldiers, they said, well, yes, we find only Soviet soldiers. The Germans took all of theirs. We rarely find any foreign remains. They wouldn't even say German. What is most important is that according to even the latest Levada polls, even though Russian attitudes toward Germany at the moment are somewhat less positive than they have been in previous years, 61% of Russians are very positive, or basically positive about Germans this year. In 2015, it was 73%. In 2011, it was 84%. But a significant majority believe that relations between Russia and Germany are normal, are peaceful, are calm, and many Russians, especially the kind of Russians that I know, are very impressed with Germany's longtime and renowned Vergangenheitsbewältigung, the facing down of the dark pages of their past, and longing for a time when Russia might similarly face down its own Stalinist past. In conclusion, in reflecting on Russian war memory, really, I can think of no other instance as an historian who knows something about general history in which a particular past historical event continues to be so energetically celebrated year after year and decade after decade in the service of current socio-political imperatives to shape and to bolster patriotic pride even 3/4 of a century later. What's striking to me is the notion that seems to be so important that the USSR, or even Russia, but really the USSR, was virtually solely responsible for the victory. That seems to be so important. Naša pobjeda. In fact, I've marched in two Immortal Regiment marches in 2015 and 2016 in Moscow. And in 2015 one, the first person I came up to, actually I was with a Moscow friend, and he asked the question the obvious question is, why are you here? And she had no way of knowing I'm American. I mean, I wasn't even saying a word, and I wear my wedding ring on the right hand so that I'd pass for a Russian when I'm there. And the answer was, so the world will know that it's our victory. The Americans think it was their victory, but they only came in at the last moment. And in fact, you know, I was reading the Russian sort of reportage on the 75th commemoration of D-Day, to which idiotically Putin had not been invited, but Angela Merkel was. Go figure. I mean, it was really stupid. But so the idea that it was really our victory. And I guess my last consideration, if this doesn't sound too provincial, and speaking as an American, this pride in their past is such a surrealistically striking contrast to the memory politics that's been going on in my country since 2017, in the past 2 years. The driving impulse in America is to evoke national shame for the dark deeds in our past that had been insufficiently acknowledged. In Russia, monuments have been going up right and left. In America, they're coming down. The Civil War generals, those started with the taking down of the Civil War generals. Then there's been what I like to call, if you can bear with me for you non-native English speakers, a toponymic epidemic. Name changes, taking away the names of anybody who ever owned a slave. I mean, imagine if in Russia they started saying we can't actually use this building because the owner was a serf owner. I mean, had serfs, right? So it's really, and holidays in which there had been a sense of pride. So for example, just recently, last month, was Columbus Day, and it was one of my favorite holidays in New York. There was always a Columbus Day parade. Now there's no Columbus Day parade, and there's no Columbus Day in New York anymore. In Boston, it's been renamed Indigenous Peoples Day, because of all the terrible things that Columbus had done. And I remember how a few years ago, I forget, 2015, maybe 2016, at the annual convention of the Association for Slavic, Eurasian, and East European Studies, ASEAS, I said something about in the future, 2020, is going to be the 75th anniversary of the victory. But in Boston, my hometown, no one's going to notice it because that's the period where we're going to be commemorating the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the Pilgrims and the Mayflower ship to Plymouth Rock in 1620, which I assumed then was going to be a big commemoration. Well, forget it. I mean, now there are always all these, the protests of what the Pilgrims did to the Native Americans and so on. Personally, I will be happier, and in fact will be in Moscow on May 9th, 2020, marching in the Immortal Regiment. Thank you.